Greetings, viewers. EricTheCarGuy here. Wasn't sure if the thing was going to ding. Welcome to the show, and thank you for watching. This is a show where I answer your automotive questions that get posted to this Google Plus live event. Well, I attempt to answer your questions, and sometimes I butcher your names, so I apologize for that in advance. A couple of things before we get started. First of all, if you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those comments that are posted there, so I won't be answering those questions that are posted to the YouTube video after this thing is all done. Also, any questions posted to the Google Plus event after the show is over will also not be answered, so I apologize for that in advance. The next live show will be on October 8th. There'll be a link in the description for all that stuff. In fact, check the description after the show for many of the things that were discussed here. I go back and add links, videos, all types of things that are additional information to the show. So if you have questions, you might want to check the description before you ask them. Lastly, if you do have automotive questions and you don't have time to wait for the show, 24/7, 365 over at EricTheCarGuy.com. We have lots of wonderful features there to help you with automotive issues, should you have them. So I would ask that you go there if you have questions outside of what gets answered here. But since it's only a half-hour show, I'm going to just jump into my questions here that have already been posted. So thanks to everyone who is participating today. I'm going to jump around a bit. I'm trying to get some old and new questions in. First name I'm going to butcher this evening is Diraj Elbal. Apologies. All right, so he has a 1997 Honda CRV Automatic with 170,000 kilometers. My issue is that after sitting for a few hours, it is very difficult to start. I have to floor the throttle to about 2,500 RPM for a couple of minutes to get it to go into drive without stalling. There is a slight odor of gas around the car. I have checked for leaks and see nothing. I have replaced the gas filter, distributor, igniter, plugs, wires, cleaned I'm AIC, I'm assuming that's the idle valve, cleaned the throttle body and the air intake and replaced the filter. I was told there might be a known issue with injectors leaking. Is this a possibility, and how would I test for this and replace as necessary? Thanks as always. You rock, brother. Okay, first of all, in my experience, Hondas don't normally have fuel delivery issues. It's rare. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's rare. But usually somebody got in there and did something that caused it. It does sound like you're running rich based on everything you're describing here. It sounds like the engine has too much fuel, not enough air. But there could be a lot of things that could cause this. Number one thing that comes to mind is, first, do you have any check engine light? Do you have any codes? Do you have anything to go along with this that might point you in the direction of what the problem might be? That's your most important clue. And I would be surprised if you didn't have a check engine light with all the things you have listed here. Rather than going directly for the injectors, I would suggest first checking for vacuum leaks. I have a video on how to do this. It's not that difficult. The video I use carburetor cleaner to spray around the intake to see if the idle changes, but you can also use water if you're concerned about fire issues, which is a valid concern in that instance. So as far as that goes, yeah, first start looking around for vacuum leaks. You've already covered a lot of the bases as far as the ignition system, like say if you had a misfire cylinder that was missing or something like that. But moreover than that, this has got quite a few miles on it. You might also want to do a compression test just to be on the safe side, because if it's running quite badly, it could be, and I have seen this on occasion, I believe you have the B series engine in there. What I have seen on occasion is the exhaust valves can sometimes get burned up and get holes in them. This will cause an engine miss and possibly cause that gas smell because really the fuel isn't being combusted properly. It's not able to compress properly as a result. So it can cause that type of issue, and I have seen it from time to time on that engine. A compression test will let you know if you've got a cylinder down on compression. It won't tell you whether or not the valve is the issue. What you need to do in that instance is do a leak down test to see if the cylinder leakage, if you have low compression on that given cylinder, is caused by, say, a leaking exhaust valve. And the way you do that is pretty much, well, I'll leave a link in the description for a video on that, but really run compressed air into the cylinder while the cylinder is all the way up to top dead center. And when you do so, the air, if there's a leak in that cylinder, will leak out. And if you suspect an exhaust valve, you can listen at the tailpipe and you'll hear the air rushing out. If it's an intake valve, you can listen where the throttle body is, and you can hear the air leaking out there. If it's, say, for instance, a cooling system problem, You know, maybe there's a head gasket failure or some crack in a block or cylinder head, you can take the radiator cap off and you'll find bubbles coming out of there. And lastly, if it's slipping past the piston rings, you can take the oil cap off and listen down inside there, and you can tell where the air is going at that point. So it's a good idea whenever you're confronted with a pretty major problem like this to just verify the engine is mechanically sound. In addition to making sure that it has good compression, or at least decent compression on something with that many miles, you also want to make sure it's mechanically in time. I'm sure it's had a timing belt at one time or another. It's a dual overhead cam engine. If it didn't get put together right, well, that could contribute to some of the issues you're having. So I guess what I'm saying is many times people want to go and start replacing parts and sensors and that type of thing in these instances. But what is often overlooked is the mechanical condition of the engine itself. And I stress this all the time. So if you're confronted with a problem like this, particularly if you don't have any check engine lights or anything, verify the mechanical integrity of the engine just to be sure that it's in good shape, because if you don't have a mechanically sound engine, nothing else will work right. So that should give you something else to, well, something to start with anyway, but good luck with that issue. So as far as well, real quick, I'll touch on if you're concerned about leaking injectors. Like I said, it's not a common thing. What I would do is hook a fuel pressure gauge up to the system, and you're going to need a special adapter to do that on a Honda, and check the fuel pressure. And really what you want to do is you want to check the fuel pressure after you shut the engine off. There's fuel pressure constantly going to the fuel rail to help run the engine, so there's pressure always behind those injectors. If you check the pressure after you shut it down, that pressure should maintain itself for a good long time. It shouldn't drop off rapidly. If it does drop off rapidly, that would indicate a leak somewhere. In order to verify or isolate that leak, you would pinch off the return line on the fuel rail and then shut the engine down. And if the leak is still present, then you can say, okay, the leak is up on the engine side. If it's not, then the leak is inside the gas tank. And it's somewhat common for higher mileage vehicles for the check valve inside the fuel pump to go bad, which would create a long cranking condition. But you sound like you have something else there. But to answer that question, as far as to check for a leaking injector, that's how you would go about it. You go about it basically by checking the fuel pressure, and then you'd have to go one by one to those injectors and look for that. But also an even quicker test is to pull the spark plugs. If you've got a spark plug that's soaked with gas and the rest are all dry, that's a pretty good indicator that's a fuel injector problem on that cylinder. So even before you grab a fuel pressure tester or something like that, a spark plug is a window into the combustion chamber. So when you take the spark plugs out, lay them next to the cylinder that you took them out of and take a good look at them and inspect them. If they're covered with a lot of brown, crusty stuff, that usually indicates that that cylinder is burning oil. The fuel, that's something else, the fuel smell. Very rare occasions I've found coolant leaks this way, just because there was a significant amount of coolant. And what coolant usually does is it steam cleans the inside of the cylinder. If you've got a cylinder head gasket leak or something like that, it usually cleans the inside of that cylinder really nice. So those are pretty easy to spot in those instances. But it's a comparison between the other plugs, because you want them all to look the same. If they look different, especially if one is standing out, that's where you can focus your search as far as what cylinder might be causing an issue. Now I'm moving on. Okay, we had another one up here at the top that I wanted to touch on. Okay. Slade Marshall. Hey Eric, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? What are your thoughts on engine degreasing, cleaning with a hose / pressure washer? What components should you protect, if any, on a modern engine? Thanks. You know, it's at least, I would say, maybe once a month where somebody comes on to the forum and asks a similar question, or say, I just washed my engine and now my car won't start, or it won't run right, or something of that nature. Given the frequency of that, I am not an advocate of cleaning your engine, namely because, I mean, you could try to protect components and try to keep it out of those certain areas, but I got to tell you, a lot of times it invites more problems than it solves. I mean, if you want a pristine engine, I say find the oil leaks and fix them, and then clean those parts as you remove them when you go to replace whatever gasket or seal has caused the issue. But just going in and just hitting it with a pressure washer, so many times it hasn't ended well. And for that reason, I'm going to say, no, I don't recommend doing it. And I haven't done it. I've driven around with greasy, dirty engines. It doesn't bother me. I've worked on greasy, dirty engines. However, in the diesel field, this is very different. But guess what? Diesels don't have ignition systems, so they don't have as many problems. But also, those trucks are maintained, or just heavy equipment is maintained very differently. Well, for the most part, very differently than people maintain their vehicles. So it's apples and oranges if you're going to bring that into the argument. But if you're asking the question, I say I don't recommend, especially pressure washing an engine. However, if you are going to have to, if you absolutely insist on washing your engine, I would say it's probably better for the environment to do it at a car wash. Main reason being is I've actually asked about this, and most of them have traps to trap some of their detergents, and in order to be a car wash, they have to have these types of things. So they prevent that grease and that gunk from getting back into the water table, which is really kind of important because I don't want to drink your dirty engine grease further on down the road. So, you know, just think of that rather than just sitting in your driveway and hosing the stuff off and letting it run down the storm drain. Just saying, be nice to the planet, because it honestly doesn't care if you're here or not. All right, there was somebody who had some Acura Legend questions, and I know lots and lots about Acura Legends. Let's see. All right, well, we'll just stop here. We've got Chungalareta. I probably said that wrong. 1234. Hey Eric, I'm writing from Costa Rica. I'm sure you heard what I was saying, but in my mind, I would like to be sitting on a beach and sipping drinks with umbrellas in them, whatever. Anyway, thanks for all your help. My 1998 S10 truck is giving me a code PO440. Evap system malfunction. Gas cap, vent valve, purge valve, and tank pressure sensor were replaced, and the same code keeps coming on. Quite honestly, I don't want to dig any deeper unless the issue can cause major damage to the engine. Not likely, right? Evaporative emissions, honestly, for the most part, you'll hardly ever know that you have an evaporative emission problem. But the system is there for emissions, and mainly to sequester fuel vapors from leaving the gas tank and also the engine during periods when it's not operating. So rather than venting those things to the atmosphere, which, by the way, if you're thinking, nah, who cares? Once gas turns to a vapor, it leaves. If you leave gasoline, if you had a bucket of gasoline and you just set it out in the open, eventually all of it would go away. So in essence, it can compromise your fuel economy. Think about that. So you're thinking, gas is just disappearing, I don't care. Well, that's money going out of your pocket, right out of your gas tank. Think of it that way. That being said, you've replaced a lot of parts, but really, evaporative emissions, that's not quite the way you go about it. Most times you use a smoke machine, which you inject smoke into the system and you look for leaks. You activate solenoids to see if they're operating properly or if they may be leaking. That's usually what they run you through in the troubleshooting of codes like this. However, I mean, those things are expensive. But I have most recently seen some viewers who have posted their own homemade smoke machines. And just an FYI, I believe some of the smoke machines you can use baby oil in. So apparently heating up baby oil makes a lot of smoke. So really all you would need is some form of sealed container, a way to heat up the stuff, and a way to run it through. And I think the things I saw online use compressed air, and many of the smoke machines use a similar device, something to move the smoke through the system. But that usually helps you find leaks, and that's the name of the game here. Because with those leaks, they're very difficult to detect where they may be, and it could be a solenoid, as you pointed out, or something like that. But also, as you pointed out, will it hurt my engine? Likely not. But if you have emission testing in your area, that's definitely something you're going to have to contend with at some point, because that's an automatic fail for an emissions test. Food for thought. Here's another one. Donna Marie Gregerson. I think I pronounced that correctly. I always get happy when I do the right thing. Eric, I just watched your Flush the Heater Core YouTube video. How long did that take you? I have no heat in my 1999 Plymouth, and I'm having a guy flush the heater core on Tuesday. I hope that's it. The winters are cold here, and I have 2 young boys. I can relate. Okay. A lot of people default to my heater core is clogged if I don't have heat. The truth is there are several things that can cause that, and also you can actually determine if the heater core is the issue if you don't have heat. First thing to do in that situation is there's two hoses that go into the firewall or bulkhead, depending upon where you're from, that come from the engine. Usually one is directly off the water pump and goes into the firewall or heater core inside your dashboard. So there are two hoses. There's one that goes in and then there's one that comes out. So it circulates the coolant through that heater core. Now, if the heater core is clogged, that coolant will not circulate through the heater core. And here's the other thing I'll throw out there that I get asked about a lot. If my heater core isn't functioning, is my engine going to overheat? No. The only reason the heater core is there is for your comfort. The engine could care less. In fact, with some leaking heater cores, which are a real pain to get to because many times you have to remove the dashboard, similar to the videos that I'm doing now with the Acura Vigor, I have bypassed the heater core altogether. In other words, I've taken one of those hoses off, actually taken both hoses off the heater core and looped them together so that the coolant just circulates through and just forgets about the heater core. Eliminates the coolant leak. Of course, you don't have heat at that point, but it is a quick fix, especially if you're on the side of the road and you're losing coolant. Okay, now getting back to diagnosing a faulty heater core. Now, if your heater core is clogged, if you feel the hoses, after the engine is warmed up, of course, so make sure your engine is warmed up to operating temperature, and they may be hot, maybe put a pair of gloves on or something, but you'll still be able to feel if the hose is warm. So feel both hoses. Both hoses should have some heat to them. Even though it's passing through the heater core and everything, that other hose is not, the return hose is not going to get cold going through the heater core. So you'll have like one really hot hose or fairly warm hose, and then the other hose will be sort of close to it. If the heater core is clogged, one hose will be hot, the other one will be cold. That indicates, or significantly cooler. That would indicate a clogged heater core. In that instance, I would recommend the procedure that you saw in that video, which a lot of people laugh at because I got a bunch of coolant in my face. And yes, it does taste like maple syrup. So how long did it take? Not long at all. But just watch out for a face full of coolant in that instance. But that's how you would diagnose it. Other things that can cause no heat: air in the cooling system. First thing that comes to mind, often overlooked. In other words, coming back to, yet again, a mechanical issue causing something like this. If the cooling system has been recently serviced, you got a radiator, got a water pump, whatever, and they just put it back together and they did not purge the air from the cooling system, that air most often gets trapped inside the heater core. So in other words, you've got an air bubble inside your dashboard, which should circulate warm coolant through there in order for you to have heat. But the air doesn't allow that to happen. It sort of cavitates. And as a result, you've got no heat. So it blows out cold. Or, like, say you accelerate, and all of a sudden you've got heat while you're accelerating. You're like, yeah, it's working again, because that sort of forces that air pocket out of there. And you get heat for a little bit, but then you stop, and the heat goes away again. So that's a really good indication that you've got air in that cooling system. Or sometimes you might even hear like a sloshing sound inside the dashboard, or maybe even a gurgling noise, something of that nature when you're trying to operate the heat. That could also be an indication that there's air in the system. And into a video that I have about purging the air from a cooling system. But that's many times one of the first places I go. It can also cause that same condition that I was describing as far as testing a heater core, with one hose being warm and one hose being cool. So air in the system can also cause that problem. That's why I always look for air in the system first. Just pull the radiator cap off. If you see that there's a, you do it when it's cold. Don't do it with the engine hot, because sometimes once you release pressure on that radiator cap, the coolant could come gushing out, and that could be a problem. So wait till the engine's cold, take the radiator cap off, and look down inside there. If you see that there's could be an indication of air in the cooling system, I just go ahead and do that procedure that I'm going to post a link to the video, and just right out of the gate, I just purge the system, and just to make sure. One of the things to make sure of when you're doing that purging is make sure your slider for your temperature control is all the way to the hot setting, and your fan, your blower motor fan for the interior, is off, because you don't want to blow air past that heater core. You'll actually cool the system, and you're not trying to do that. You're trying to purge the air. So that's basically what you do is radiator cap off. You run the engine about 2,500 RPM. I use a special funnel that I put on top of the radiator that actually helps contain any spillage that might happen. You don't have one of those funnels, you can just, well, a lot of people don't. You can just slip a catch pan underneath, and it will spill out. So don't do this in your garage or something like that. Do it someplace where spilling antifreeze isn't going to be an issue. And once again, put something underneath there, because it's going to come dripping out. But it's likely going to come out a lot of different places. That funnel really makes the job a lot easier, but it's not necessary. And as far as bleeder valves, everybody says, you know, I open the bleeder valve, I bled the system. For the most part, bleeder valves are just on the engines to help make filling the system easier. It's like, I'm trying to think what to compare it to, but if you take a straw in a drinking glass and you put your finger over the top of it and you pull it up out of there, there's a bunch of fluid that's still in there. It's a similar thing. When you go to try to pour the coolant into the engine, there's no place for the air that you're. So when you go to try to pour it in, it tends to bubble up and come out. But if you open up a bleeder valve and you're filling the system, that air has a place to go. In fact, as you're filling the system, you'll hear it coming out that bleeder valve. So it makes filling the system easier. It has little to nothing to do in most cases with actually bleeding the cooling system out. And if you have an expansion tank, I get asked about this a lot on your vehicle. An expansion tank is, instead of having a radiator cap on top of a radiator, you might have a separate plastic tank somewhere with something like a radiator cap on it. Then when you remove it, it releases pressure similar to what it would do if you had a radiator cap on an expansion tank. In those systems, what I do is I use the expansion tank as my funnel. So I follow all the same steps. I leave the cap off of the expansion tank, and I don't fill the expansion tank up all the way because the coolant will expand, and you don't want it overflowing, and you don't want to overfill the system. So you leave it a bit low, and then, like I said, just use the expansion tank as that spill-free funnel. And normally that seems to work out pretty well. However, some manufacturers have weird bleeding procedures, but they have procedures for this, and that's how important it is. So if the cooling system isn't serviced properly, you can, so be mindful of that. But I hope you're able to get the heat back in there, and if that heater core is clogged, I hope it's easily cleaned out for you. So good luck, and stay warm. All right. Lost my legend question. Oh, here's one from Ray McKeevan. Sorry, McKeeve. Sorry, I'm just going to stop there. Eric, I was replacing calipers on my 04 Isuzu Rodeo. Things were going good until I realized that the master cylinder ran dry. I've gone all around the vehicle 2 times. When I start it up, the pedal goes right to the floor. Does my master cylinder need to be bled? If so, can I do that on the car? Yes, to both questions. Whenever you run a master cylinder dry during a procedure like that, you have to start all over as if you just replaced the master cylinder. And whenever you install a master cylinder on a vehicle, you need to do what's called bench bleeding, which means that you work the master cylinder on the bench to make sure the fluid is passing through it properly before you install it on the vehicle. Otherwise, you'll have a situation very similar to what you describe here. So in your case, what I would recommend is just take the lines off of the master cylinder itself. Then fill the master cylinder up, have a buddy maybe in the car pump the pedal for you, and you can just take your fingers and plug off the holes whenever they lift up on the pedal. And that way there won't be any air drawn back into the master cylinder, or very little air drawn back into the master cylinder when this happens. And do this until you've got a nice squirt of brake fluid whenever they step on the brake pedal out of both holes. So once you've done that, reattach the lines. It will drip out, but just make sure the master doesn't run dry again. Top off the master with the brake fluid, reinstall those lines. And or sometimes, you know, a lot of viewers suggested this on one of the other videos that I did, and slightly depress the brake pedal so that that blocks off those ports so the master cylinder doesn't bleed out. That may be another option for you. As I said, many viewers commented on some videos that I did last. And it's one way to prevent the master cylinder from bleeding out as it did when you were replacing those calipers. Me, I have a pair of needle nose vice grips with a couple pieces of fuel line on those vice grips to basically pinch lines off. I haven't had any issues with damaging brake hoses. I've been doing it for years. But it won't work on steel braided brake lines. Don't do that to steel braided brake lines. And steel braided brake lines, you'll know them when you see them because they're steel on the outside. They're silver on the outside as opposed to just like the black rubber hose that you normally see. But that's what I pinch off those black hoses to prevent things from bleeding out. But as I stated, you can also depress the brake pedal slightly, like halfway or something like that. Maybe get a I don't know, a snow brush or something and prop it up against the seat, try to keep it from bleeding out further. But that does block off those ports and makes it so that air cannot come back into the system. Once you've done that and reconnected those lines to the master cylinder, then bleed all 4 wheels. Now, as far as the bleeding procedure, most people do it this way, and they start at the right rear wheel, or depending upon what side the driver's side is on or whatever, the side that's furthest from the master cylinder. So if you have a right-hand drive car, you would start on the left rear wheel. That's basically what I'm getting at. And then they go to the right front, and then they go to the left rear, and then the right front is how many people have bled brakes. Now, one day, for whatever reason, I started reading through the Honda manual about the brake bleeding procedure. I was actually having some issues, I think, where I had a soft pedal, and I replaced a bunch of parts, couldn't figure out why I still had a soft pedal, so I wanted to consult the manual, see if there was something special that I needed to do. Lo and behold, the Honda service manual at the time said exactly the opposite as far as the bleeding procedure. Start at the wheel that's closest to the master cylinder, which in that case would have been the left front, and then go to the right rear, and then go to the right front, and then the left rear. It seems counterintuitive, but then I thought about it. Most master cylinders are set up on what's called a split diagonal system, which means the right front and the left rear wheel are on the same circuit. So you've got those 2 ports coming out of the master cylinder. So one of those is for, like I said, the right front and left rear wheel, and the other one is for the left front and the right rear wheel. That being said, if you're trying to purge the air out, it almost seems like it makes sense to get it out as soon as possible. So if you've got air all the way up to the master cylinder, you can get it out quicker in that split diagonal system by starting closest to the master cylinder. Just throwing this out there because I know many people do it exactly the opposite way, but ever since that day I read that service manual, I started doing it that way. Now, did that solve my problem with that Honda I was working on? No. What I actually ended up doing was going out and slamming on the brakes really hard a few times, and the brake pedal came right back up. People ask me, well, Eric, why? Why does that work? Well, I have a theory, and the theory is the master cylinder resets itself. And when I say the master cylinder resets itself, there's those 2 ports that we talked about that are exit ports where the pressure goes out of the master cylinder. There are 2 cup seals inside a piston that's connected to the brake pedal. So the brake pedal is connected by linkage, and there's a piston inside of a bore, and there's 2 seals inside that master cylinder, and they're cup seals. And cup seals seal very well under pressure. In fact, they seal even more under pressure than they do when they're not under pressure. But it's designed so that as you depress the pedal, that cup seal sort of expands against the inside of the bore, helps force the fluid out. And when you release, it allows it to drag back into position. Now, my theory is the reason why this works with a spongy brake pedal, if you've done this, you're sure you have all the air out and you're at your wit's end, is go out and slam on the brakes. And what that does is that cup seal, like I said, they seal more under force. So you're putting a lot of force on that cup seal, therefore it's sitting, and when it had a spongy pedal, it was sitting here in the bore. But after you did your emergency stopping, it's sitting back here. So it's sitting farther back in the bore and starting to seal back here as opposed to sealing up here towards the front. And that's my theory. My theory is it resets the master cylinder. Also, it activates the ABS and vehicles with ABS. And because of that, it helps cycle any air that might be in the ABS system through. That could also come into play. These are just theories, by the way. This is just what I've come up with, but this does work. And like I said, that's what ended up solving my problem. And from then on, whenever I had a spongy pedal after I did a bunch of work and I'd done everything I could do, I take it out, slammed on the brakes a few times, brake pedal was aces. Just passing that along. Wow, we have blown through this half hour. It's like whew, nothing. All right. How about Mark Ril Kuchar? Eric, I have a 2002 Chrysler Voyager with 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine. The problem is when idling in gear, the steering wheel, dashboard, and my seat shakes. But once the engine is above idle, it feels like it's supposed to. It also does the same thing while idling around a parking lot. The mill isn't on. So you have no check engine light. Thank you for that information. That's helpful. You just have a rough idle on a 4-cylinder. Well, 4-cylinders are prone to rough idles. I'm just going to come out and say that. The reason being is a 4-cylinder, the way it's set up, it's literally like the pedals on a bicycle. You've got 2 sets of cylinders that are up, one's on compression and one's on exhaust, and you've got 2 cylinders that are down. And it fires every 180 degrees. So instead of like on a V6 engine where you've got one firing every 60 degrees, yeah, I think that is, and every 45 on a V8. So instead of having a smooth rotation of the crankshaft in a 4-cylinder, you've got this. So just in principle, and anything over 2 liters, I've talked to engineers about this. Anything over 2 liters requires a balance shaft. It's just for some reason it creates a resonance with this choppy, way a 4-cylinder engine. So they put a balance shaft in. So the 2.4, pretty sure has some form of balancing assembly inside of it. And I'm not saying that balancing assembly is what's causing the problem, but many times in those situations, especially with older vehicles, it could just be the engine is getting worn, things are getting worn. A good tune-up is a good place to start if you haven't done that already. Also checking for vacuum leaks. I say it all the time, but geez, they cause so many problems that are out there. And the auto air control valves, cleaning them can be a good start, but it's not always a solution. Sometimes cleaning them is not enough. Sometimes they just need to be replaced. So, but cleaning, I'm not opposed to that. Also, cleaning throttle bodies in those situations, I'm not opposed to that. I don't recommend removing throttle bodies when you clean them, especially if it's a drive-by-wire system. All kinds of problems that seem to show up after that. In your situation, there's sort of a checklist that I run through. In fact, I've written an entire article on dealing with idle issues. Big information in there, different steps to go through. I'm going to post a link in the description to that. I suggest you go there, check it out, see if there's something in there that strikes a chord. But the last thing on the list, and this is where a lot of people go, the last thing on the list, I don't remember now you didn't say anything about engine mounts. I try to make the engine run better first. And if I can't get the engine to that place where it's happy, the next place I look is engine mounts. Because many times engine mounts, especially on older vehicles, they get old, worn out, dry rotted. So they don't absorb the vibrations of an engine. As I said, that 4-cylinder just inherently has vibration. So look through the engine mounts last. But that is, seriously, I don't know how it happened. I guess I'm just long-winded tonight, and I apologize for that. But I was trying to put some detail into it. But that's it. We're past that half-hour mark. But I will recap with first, thank you for watching. Also, the questions, as I said, posted to the YouTube video. I'm not going to be answering those. Apologies. And also questions that are posted to this Google Plus event after the event is over. Those also won't be answered. Sorry. Once again, head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. That's where I go to answer questions. So if you're looking for me to help answer your questions, that's where I go. I go to the forum a few times a week, and I answer as many questions as I possibly can. Other than that, the next live show, once again, will be Wednesday, October 8th, 7 p.m., same bat time, same bat channel. Outside of that, I don't really have anything else for you. Other than, as I said earlier, check the description if you have questions about things I talk about in this video, and there will also be additional links. But give me a little bit to do that because it's going to take me a few minutes to put that together for you. Other than that, if you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter, and I close each of my videos, including these live events, is be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. And thanks again for watching. Really appreciate it. See ya.